From 1965 to 1971, 36 pilots from the Royal Australian Air Force flew in South Vietnam as forward air controllers within the American Tactical Air Control System. These men were selected from fighter pilots with at least 2 tours experienced and served with the United States Air Force for terms varying from 6 months to a year. The FAC's main role in South Vietnam were to spot enemy targets, call in and control airstrikes and artillery against the enemy ground forces, and to conduct visual reconnaissance. Flying small fixed-wing aircraft, the FACs would generally fly a 2.5 hour to 3 hour mission each day, 7 days a week, as well as occasional standby duties. Throughout these missions, the FAC pilots were in constant danger of being shot at by the enemy, and initially the aircraft they flew were unarmed apart from personal weapons carried inside the cockpit. At any one time, there were up to 8 RAAF pilots serving as FACs in a year, and they worked with the full range of Allied air forces, the Vietnamese Air Force, the United States Air Force, the United States Navy, and the United States Marine Corps, as well as the RAF's No. 2 Squadron. Their missions were very demanding and often dangerous. They prepared extensively with briefing on troops' positions, call signs, frequencies, and tactical plans. The FAC controlled all aircraft and artillery in the target area. There we go. In Vietnam at the time, there were 4 military districts called 1, 2, 3, and 4 Corps. Each day, some 750 to 800 close air support sorties were flown either as pre-planned missions or from alert status. The rationale behind the pre-planned tasks was to provide an even spread of airborne aircraft during the day and to a lesser extent at night, so that they could be diverted at very short notice to more immediate targets that arose, such as troops in contact. The 504th Tactical Air Support Group, which was part of the USAF, consisted of 5 tactical air support squadrons to conduct FACT operations, 4 of them in South Vietnam, in each one of the Corps, I Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, and 4 Corps. And there was one in Thailand, out of Utapao. One of the units that I ended up with was the 19th Tactical Air Support Squadron, part of the 504th Group. Was based at Benoit and had 26 forward operating locations with about 120 aircraft of 3 types and about 230 FACs deployed. The rules of engagement were relatively clear and simple. Buildings and monuments of religious significance were protected, as were villages. However, should ground fire be encountered from any such protected site, it could be struck. Weapon delivery parameters were laid down in a table of minimum safe distances. There were sound reasons to treat them as mandatory, especially since the FAC, not the fighters themselves, was responsible for troop safety. There were occasions where the FAC and the ground commander could agree on ordnance being placed more closely, usually at the ground commander's request. Next one is 3 aircraft were involved in the Vietnam period. I flew the Cessna Bird Dog, which was armed with 8 white phosphorus rockets and about 8 smoke grenades. Personal protection was an AR-15 rifle, a .38 pistol, and a good supply of survival ammunition. This 2-seater served as the original FAC aircraft in the theatre, was slow, had excellent visibility, limited payload, and it did not have instrumentation for night operations. It was only VFR. although it carried 4 radios for airstrike coordination. We had FM, high frequency, very high frequency, and ultra high frequency. We listened out on all 4 radios, and it took a while to become adept at managing that, especially when operations were hectic. It was a matter of adjusting each radio's volume so that more important nets were set at higher volumes than others. Just in the point, the Bird Dog was originally called the L-19, and it first appeared in the Korean War as an Army aeroplane. The second aircraft that operated in Vietnam was the Cessna 02, called the Oscar Deuce. It was a military adaptation of the civilian Cessna 337. 510 were modified for military service for interim use by the FACs to replace the 01. This was a faster aircraft with 2 engines in a tractor-pusher arrangement, 4 hard points for ordnance, and a 7-hour loiter time. Its side-by-side seating limited the pilot's line of vision to the right and to the rear. Performance was a problem because if you lost one engine, it generally had a slow descent to ground level. From mid-1969, Jade Fax at Vung Tau flew this aircraft supporting the 1st Australian Air Force, the 1st Australian Task Force at Nui Dat. The best aircraft during the Vietnam War was the purpose-built North American, now Boeing OV-10A Bronco, which was introduced into service from 6th of July 1968. It was fitted with rockets and 4 machine guns in the sponsons at the bottom of the fuselage. Had great visibility because it had a shaped canopy which allow you to look over the side and down vertically. The avionics suite included 8 secure radios along with flight instruments and was fast and manoeuvrable. Even so, a more modern and capable aircraft was no guarantee against enemy fire. And it was remarkable that a small number of RAF FACs suffered damage to their aircraft from ground fire, but only one was shot down but survived after ejecting from his aircraft. This photograph is the one of the aircraft that arrived at Lai Khe on a familiarisation or in-country familiarisation. I got to fly in it a couple of times, 4 hours in the back seat, checking out the new FACs in country. And I volunteered to stay on beyond my 6 months of flying, but they sent me home. Australian FACs were required to be particularly adaptable. They were flying in a different air force that operated on a much larger scale than the RAF, with little direct supervision. They were required to have high levels of self-discipline and responsibility. These demands were all met by the men ranging from wing commander down to flying officer who filled this role. They were highly decorated with 2 distinguished service orders, 15 distinguished flying crosses, 16 mentioned in dispatches, and numerous American and South Vietnamese honours being awarded to the group. The sequence of events in controlling an aircraft strike or an airstrike followed a basic pattern, although it was rare to find 2 missions that went exactly the same. And there was always room for variation and improvisation throughout the period of the strike. Nonetheless, intense pressure remained on the FAC to follow procedures precisely and to achieve effective coordination of all factors likely to come into play. The first requirement was to locate the target, obtain clearance for an attack, and gather as much information as possible in preparation for a briefing to the assigned fighters. If present, The FAC then makes contact with the friendlies on the ground and determines their precise location and proximity to the target, along with any other details that they may have. This information would be jotted down in shorthand on the aircraft's window with a Chinograph pencil. The next job was to work out an attack pattern which would give the best target coverage and to minimise any risk to the friendlies with the attack pattern sorted out. With the attack pattern sorted out, the fire support coordination line was determined and registered with the artillery headquarters to prevent conflict between the artillery shells and the friendly aircraft. Those shells could go up to 15,000 feet, depending on what the sortie was or the task was from the guns. When the fighters joined the radio net, they were directed to a rendezvous position, their flight and weapon load details obtained, and again recorded on the fax window. So you ended up with, on the right-hand side with me, with a whole bunch of black hieroglyphics down the window, which gave you all the information that you needed. I'll go on. The number of FAC aircraft, the fighters and bombers that could be under your control at the time would be the F-100, the F-4C, the Cessna A-37, a very good aeroplane, very manoeuvrable, was always over the target, whereas the F-100 and some of the other aircraft had very, very large areas over which they flew while they were doing the sorties, doing the strikes. There's our Canberra bomber. It's releasing 6 1,000-pound bombs. By the way, those bombs are ex-Second World War. So we disposed of them back in 1968. The limitation with the Canberra was that it needed a 15-mile run-in to hit a target. So by the time you deployed the smoke and told them to hit the target, you might have to send in another rocket to make sure that they were hitting the right area because the smoke would dissipate. The American version was this Martin B-57B Canberra. It's, if you have a look at the cockpit, it's a tandem cockpit. That aeroplane could carry a stack of bombs, 2 on each side, 1,000 pounders or 750 pounders, and it didn't operate straight and level. It was just like a normal dive bomber. The last one that we operated with was the Sky Raider. This is not an E, it's an H, but it had bombs and rockets, although they very rarely used the rockets in Vietnam. Now, at the rendezvous, the FAC and the fighters established mutual contact, and the FAC briefs them on the target details, attack direction, weapon sequence, friendly positions, and emergency procedures, particularly the bailout area. A particularly important piece of information given at this time was where the FAC intends to position himself during the strike. If the weapon load involved low-angle passes using high-drag bombs, then the best position for the FAC was almost overhead the target. The fighters would then pass almost underneath him on each pass. If high angle, we would offset to the side so that we kept track of the guys in the dive and the recovery so that there was no collisions. With the final attack clearance obtained and the fire support coordination line activated, the FAC marks the target with a white phosphorus rocket. The white phosphorus rocket that we used were a 2.75-inch high-velocity rocket that had very little gravity drop over 3,000 feet. So you're normally at 1,500 feet. You point towards your target, fire, and it's fairly accurate for an aeroplane that doesn't have a sight. Our only sight was we flew along at high speed, as fast as we could go, straight and level. And when we were steady, we draw a Chinograph pencil along the front windscreen, level with the horizon. That and the centerpiece on the canopy, front windscreen, was basically our aiming point. It was, as I say, it had very little gravity drop, and we could get it within a very close distance of where the target was. When we marked the target with the rocket, we could also do it with grenades, which we used as smoke grenades when we run out of rockets. If you didn't hit the target, then you would describe the target position in relation to the marker using the standard clock code. If you did, then an instruction, clear hot, hit my smoke, would suffice. And when the fighters roll in for each attack, they acknowledge that they have the FAC in sight as well as the target. If friendly troops are in close proximity, then the FAC notifies the ground commander to throw coloured smoke to mark his position and to get his men to keep their heads down. The sighting of the friendly smoke is also acknowledged by the fighters. The FAC then clears each aircraft in turn for weapon release, ensuring that each fighter pass was on the specified attack heading and not endangering friendlies. Throughout the attack, the fuller shot is observed, and this is a good example, and corrected on each subsequent pass. You might notice, can you see that cursor on that screen?
Yep.
Okay, there's an F4 there. The previous aircraft had gone through, and that's the bomb smoke from the bomb burst. And the target was just back here to the left bottom. This one is where the bomb is actually exploding. There's the marker. You can see a few bomb craters there from preceding. And there's the F4 pulling away up there in the top corner. Throughout the whole sequence, the FAC was in constant contact with the fighters, the friendlies, and with his tactical air control party, in case further flights were needed to neutralise the target. With troops in contact situation, it was common for the tactical air control party to request a flight of fighters every 15 minutes until the FAC was happy with the results. Once ordnance was expended, the fighters would hold high and dry while the FAC conducted a bomb damage assessment. 20mm cannon or miniguns were kept in reserve by the fighters should they be seen to be or should the FAC be seen to be taking ground fire. Now, this is a typical bomb damage assessment. Now, this is probably a day or two later, because when the bombs go off, all the leaves hit the ground, and there's no variation in between the canopy and the ground because all the leaves are on the ground. But once they die off, you're left with this situation where you've got trenches running up through there. And in this particular case, there was a bunker back up in there, but you can't see it in the shot. At the end of the BDA, the results of bomb damage assessment, the results would be passed to the fighters, and we'd give it in the bomb damage assessment the target coordinates, the timing, where what bombs where they landed, and everything like that, and a brief description of what you see on the ground, be it trenches or hooches or bunkers. Hooches being wooden buildings, if you're not aware of what that terminology is. the BDA would also be passed to our tactical air control party as well. And once all that was done, the fire support coordination line would be deactivated, and the artillery advisory agency would be advised that the strike has been complete. The next mission that we had was visual reconnaissance, and that was probably almost the same importance as running a strike. It was less exciting, but just doing visual reconnaissance led to some surprising results and contributed to the intelligence database. It was usual to be initially sceptical about what could be discerned from about 1,500 feet, but as experience was gained, flying over the area of operations every day increased familiarity with any changes in patterns of activity, readily detected and noted. Indicators were from cooking fires, traffic marks in long grass and mud in rice paddies, or along river banks and canals, movement patterns to and from villages and nearby fields, and vegetable gardens hidden under trees. The appearance of trails and creek crossings indicated recent movements, and attempts at cultivation were easily detected. This is one of my favourite target areas. It was a figure of eight woods, I called it. I was flying along and I noticed a white, blue tarpaulin on the ground. And we were mandated to fly at 1,500 feet, but on this particular day, when I found this tarpaulin, I decided to go down a little bit lower. I flew away, dropped down to treetop level, ran right across it, and I found a GPCAPT guy spreading rice over the tarpaulin. So that immediately told us that there was accommodation around in that area, and so we started putting in bombs around the place, and it was a camp area for the VC. By the way, the area that I operated in, it was basically a free fire zone, so that if anything was untoward, you called up support and it was prosecuted. Another one was in this area here. This is old rice paddies. This area up in the top right-hand corner is what we call a roan plough area. That is where the army went in with big D8 bulldozers, if not bigger, with a chain across them, and they just cleared a swathe of land. And if you want to go back in history, most of the Northern Territory airfields in the Second World War were cleared that particular way by the US Army engineers in 1942. Okay, now in around there's been a number of bombs dropped around in here, but you can see there's a hooch just there and a hooch just there. It's just a ADAP type building that accommodates, and there's another one there. So it was really great finding targets like that. Because we operated over this area all the time, after 6 months, you didn't need a map. You could pick out a point and provide a grid reference to it back to the TACP without looking at a map. That's how closely we were monitoring those areas. The next job that we had was artillery adjustment. We also stayed over the target adjusting guns to find the correct range. this one slides a 155 millimetre M109 self-propelled howitzer that was based at Lai where I was. This mission involved follow-up aerial inspection to assess the results and estimate enemy losses. Another mission was troops in contact day and night. That's when you really had yourself hanging out, making sure that you could get the fighters to deliver ordnance in close proximity to the troops so that they could make the enemy break contact. Could be day and night. At night it was very interesting. You could see where the firefights were. We had green tracer, they had red tracer, and you could pick out where the lines of the troops were. Sometimes we had what they called moon glow, which was a DC-3 or a C-47 fitted with flares. They would pop them out at a medium altitude and they'd float down, illuminate the whole area, and we would put fighters in underneath and try and deliver the weapons as close as we could, or the ordnance as close as we could. It was a trying time with troops in contact. We really pushed the limits of weapon deployment and closeness to the troops. And if it wasn't close enough, it was up to the friendly commander to say walk it in, and he would ask for whatever ordnance that we could provide, and mainly bombs, sometimes napalm, and occasionally guns, 20 millimetre. But the troops had to keep themselves pretty well covered over or protected, otherwise they'd get struck with shrapnel and things like that. We did go close a few times, but we never ever found the end result, because if they got away with it, they did, and they didn't tell us. Because if we were responsible for injuring troops on the ground, then you could lose your job very quickly. Also, with troops in contact, we use this little spooky, which is these are 7.62 millimetre miniguns, and to see those in daytime was awesome. They put out a lot of firepower, but by hell, at night they really lit up the place with all their traces. It was unreal. Hunter-killer teams. We had Army warrant officers. These guys were unbelievable. They flew around these little Hughes Cayuses, OH6s as they were, at treetop level, 2 at a time, and they'd work in pairs, and they'd flash out camps and things like that, throw a smoke, and they'd have following behind a couple of these guys, the Huey Cobras, and then they'd work over the area. Occasionally they got really shot up. When I say shot up a bit, they received a lot of fire, ground fire, and when it was too much for them, they'd back off and get us to run a few strikes on that particular area. Other tasks that we're involved in was arc-like bomb damage assessment. Arc-like is the B-52. They flew in from Guam and sometimes Utapao in Thailand. They'd fly in at about 15,000 feet. They'd be loaded up with about 80 plus bombs, 3 aircraft at a time, in a Vic formation, and they'd pummel an area that would be at least 2 kilometres long and a kilometre wide. Now, this area has been hit by a number of B-52 strikes, and you can see the runs up this way. There's one lot going that way and one lot going that way, and there's I think one go back. How do I go back? Thing. So they cover a lot of area. One time that I did a bomb damage assessment, I don't think it was more than 15 minutes after we had to stand off five or something clicks, and we're at 1,500 feet, and it was like, well, when you get 80, 100, 200 odd bombs, dropping one after the other in these long lines, there's a lot of vibration, both on the ground and in the air. And the old aeroplane shook when we were about 5 kilometres away. And by the time I got back to the run and checked out what was going on, there were footprints in the craters. So there must have been some VC that had some very sore ears after those arc-like strikes. This is another arc-like strike, and you can see how long it goes there. There's at least 2 aeroplanes that have put that in. The last job that we used to do was troop insertion. You mightn't be able to see this too well, but there's a helicopter there, one there, one there, one there, and one there. And that's where they do a company or a platoon lift into an LZ and start doing work around those areas. Okay, now that's the FACing side of things. Now, how did I get there? Well, I was at 76 Squadron in 1968 when I got my posting. But prior to that, I'd done some FAC training through the Air Support Unit, doing a Joint Warfare course, a Carrier-Borne Liaison Officer course and a GLO course, and then the FAC course, and that was a ground course. We went out to an area up near Karua, northeast of Williamtown, where we controlled aircraft under training. And then to graduate, we went up to Singleton and we simulated FACing, ground FACing, with a firepower demonstration where we had Sabres, Mirages and Vampires dispense ordnance on Singleton Range. On the job training was mainly in Thailand in 66, in Malaysia in 66, 67, and same in Thailand, and then back in 67, 68 before I went to Vietnam. I was involved in some of the exercises at Shoalwater Bay for the, what do they call them? Regiments, the Army regiments.
RAF.
RAF, yeah. Now, this photograph was taken just before I went to Vietnam. I'm on the left, Roger Wilson's in the middle, and on the right is Wing Commander Tony Powell. He'd just come back from Vietnam, and he was going to be a CO of one of the squadrons, but unfortunately he was involved in a vehicle accident at Nelson's Bay and did not survive. That happened after I went to Vietnam. I arrived at Ton Son by civil aircraft, changed into a uniform, went to the 7th Air Force headquarters for briefings. Late in the afternoon, I flew by Caribou to Vung Tau for inwards clearance. A couple of days later, flew back to Saigon in a caribou, travelled to Benoit by chopper and staff car. Now, Benoit was about 10k or 10 miles east-northeast of Saigon, just over the Songbo River. That afternoon, I met Lieutenant Colonel Patrick, commander of the 19th Tactical Air Support Squadron. The next morning, I was briefed on fact responsibilities and rules of engagement. That afternoon, I was given a backseat ride in a bird dog out of Benoit to get a taste of things to come. Of particular interest that time was the radio fit on the bird dog and the volume of air radio traffic in Saigon, Benoit area. It's interesting to note the most used frequency in Vietnam, the whole period, was 243, which was guard. Everybody came up on it for some reason or other. On the 13th of April, I completed escape and evasion requirements and then visited the desk. Met our senior RAF FAC at the time, and that was Wing Commander Barry Thomas, and briefed on air operations. After being kitted out with flying gear, I attended the intelligence brief, travelled to Phan Rang and the 504th Tactical Tactical Indoctrination Squadron, and we went into DC-4 of all things. Now that was a thrill at the time. I'd seen many in Launceston when I was in the Department of Civil Aviation, but I never got to fly one until that day. This is Roger Wilson and myself and Gary Cooper at the Tactical Indoctrination Squadron. All facts completed an in-country conversion at the 504th Group Theatre Indoctrination School. It was initially at Dong Tam and then moved to Phan Rang, up where 2 Squadron was operating. Ground school for conversion to the O1 started the next day with a meeting with the commander, followed by a lecture in O1 engineering, cockpit time, and weapons statics, and we did a weapon static display. Briefing on munitions and effects and advice by all instructors to what could be expected in the field followed. Daily flying started early, 0700, with general handling and daily lectures on special VFR, visual reconnaissance map reading, the ALO FAC organisation, combat safety, Magpie operations. Now, Magpie was the 2 Squadrons call sign, and then the fighter bomber and the FAC missions and tactics. Flying consisted of map reading, navigation, simulating the control of an airstrike, and learning to fire rockets. Targets were abandoned villages on the coast, about 20 miles north of Phan Rang. As I say, I was amazed at the accuracy of the rockets, which had very little gravity drop. I went solo on the 20th of April after about 6.5 hours, unusually long for me due to the inflexibility of the USAF training system. On the 23rd of April, I flew my second solo ride, a standard evaluation test, and completed the necessary paperwork to end the course. I'd flown 15 hours in 7 days on this conversion. The O1 conversion took 15 hours. The OV10 pilots did about 20 hours and when they did the job, but that was a later thing. On the 24th of April, I caught a C-123 back to Benoit and the 19th TAS. Here I was advised that I was assigned to the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Infantry Division at Lai Khe. Now, Lai Khe was by tack end 31717 channel 73. Channel 73 was the tack end identifier. 317 was northwest and 17 miles. And I was allocated the call sign of Sidewinder 34, indelibly etched in my mind. The final issue of flying gear, rifle, pistol, survival kit was made, and that afternoon transport arrangements were made to go to Lyke. The next day, the 25th, was one of the most memorable days of my life. The DALO, Lieutenant Colonel Pinkton, that's the division liaison officer of the 1st Division, conveyed me by O1 to Lyke that morning. On arrival, we were met and introduced to the brigade ALO and facts of the 3rd Brigade. Upon depositing my gear in the Sidewinder hooch, 5 of us proceeded to the nearby Army mess hall for lunch. About 10 minutes after sitting down, I was suddenly sitting by myself. The others had abandoned their seats for the floor. As I was being told to do the same, I heard several explosions nearby, which turned out to be 22mm rockets. This was a rude awakening to the realities of war, tone and level set. That's Lyke, where I went to. It was about 3,000 feet long. It was aluminium PSP. C-130s landed on it on a regular basis. Our FAC area was up in this area where we had in revetments 2 aircraft. This is a Vietnamese camp, and we were over in this area here. And I'll talk more about it. It's an old rubber plantation, but it's been regenerated. Over in this side, there are a lot of Army units, left-hand side here, and that included a military hospital. Down this bottom end here was an air movements area, tarmac, where they offloaded the C-130s. But all along this road here were a stack of small revetments for helicopters where they did the troop lifts. The 1 Division headquarters was over in this area, and the 3rd Brigade was headquarters was close by. Now, that's our hooch that we lived in. It was about 50 metres from a road that led to the Vietnamese village. So, and all that separated us was a bit of barbed wire. That's a 122mm rocket. Very agricultural in its use. All they did was set up a bipod of twigs at the appropriate angle that they estimated that it would travel to the target area. And their firing device consisted of 2 D batteries wound together with wires leading to a wristwatch and to the end of the rocket. How it was fired was that they had 2 holes in the face of the clock, and when the minute hand came around to where the 2 wires were poked into it, that triggered off the motor on the rocket. So they were well and truly gone by the time the rockets fired off. That night, several more explosions were heard, resulting in everybody in the hooch scrambling for the bunker. The bunker was here. This area here is the impact point of a 122mm rocket that day. But this particular night, we ended up in there, and for the next 2.5 months, I spent every night in the bunker with the rest of the guys because we just didn't know what was going on. We were being either rocketed or mortared up to 5 times a day: dawn, breakfast, lunch, dinner, evening. So it was very trying. Just go back, the incident when I arrived and the rocket went off, about 30 metres away from the mess hall was a weather van, and a 122mm rocket went into the back end of that, and it blew out the front of it, and unfortunately it killed the weather man in the van. What had happened that night was that the VC had penetrated the wire, and they put satchel charges in these Bell 47Gs of the Nighthawks. They were an army unit. You can see a bit of the revetment there, but they had 3 of them destroyed, plus their maintenance area, and just to make the local army of the Vietnamese or Vietnamese Army
Republic
area commander a little bit sorry for himself. They decided to blow up his house, which unfortunately killed his wife and a daughter. Going back to the hooch, there's the bunker area there. We had this barbecue area. We very rarely visited the mess hall for various reasons, mainly because of our schedule of flying and everything like that. But one day we had a massive explosion occur at the mess hall. It was right on 12 o'clock, and we found out that what had happened was that somebody had planted a claymore mine at the entrance to the mess hall. Now, the army were pretty punctilious about mess times, and of course people would line up for the 12 o'clock start at lunchtime. But for some reason or other, the mess sergeant decided to let the queue in because it was let it in early, and everybody had got into the mess hall when this claymore went off at the side of the building, and fortunately nobody was killed. So, you know, they were just some of the things that we had to put up with, apart from rockets and mortars. When I got to like there was still what was left of somebody's Christmas pudding that had been hit by shrapnel, and it was still in the roof of the roof of the hooch. So what we used to do was purloin whatever food we could out of the mess sergeant, and we'd cook it over in our barbecue area here. This was our operations room with a big map of our operational area, typewriter for doing reports, and our sleeping accommodation was on the opposite side of that wall, and there was up to 6 of us in this hooch. That was our recreational area. A lot of it was self-help in protecting ourselves. We'd have these ammo boxes filled with laterite and stacked up against the wall to give blast protection. This was our hooch maid, locally employed civilian. She did all our domestics in terms of cleaning and washing. We had this old F100 drop tank set up to have potable water in it. It had been cleaned out, and on top of this Connex here, we had a electric heater underneath there, and this was full of water. It was I don't remember what the container was, but that was the Connex was our shower area. We had a multi-use toilet some distance away, which was open air, except for a screen all around it. So things were pretty basic. As you'll notice, this is PSP here, and these are also rocket containers. What the a 2.75-inch rocket came in for transportation. We called the beach the Lyke Hilton because our division, ALO, kept on inviting people to come and stay with us. You won't be able to read all the names there. We all gave ourselves a bit of job, and that's me. One of the interesting things, I joined the Air Force in 1963. I was 7.5 stone. I got back to 7.5 stone in Vietnam. Never been that light again. This is the airman's hooch. Again, protection, a basic shed with a tin roof, and you do a lot of scrounging. They've got 2 tanks there for their shower facilities there, and a great bar was set up. That's just a shot of me while I was in Vietnam, and that's another one. And to round off, this is a summary of my flying in Vietnam. You can see FAC sorties, BR sorties, hours flown on different types of things. And the big one down here, aircraft control, A37s, F100s, F4s, A1s, B57, Canberra, Spooky and Moonglow. So in 6 months and 3 weeks, I flew 522 hours and a half hours. When you really look at it, I returned home, or left Lyke on the 25th of October, processed through Bung Tau again, and caught the Qantas bird home on the 29th of October. And it was 6 months and 3 weeks, which I believe was the most demanding and probably exciting period in my life. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Mac.
Now,
Mac, thanks very much for that. What we are going to do now, if you're okay, we'll take some questions, and I'm going to start with people in the room first.
Yeah.
And we're just going to, Mac, I might just cancel the sharing. So if you just give me a moment, I'm going to do that.
Got you. Have you got me?
Yes. Now we can see you. Sorry, I'm just going back to the lectern here. So thank you. That was wonderful. Are there any questions from the room? And Dion, do you mind taking the microphone around to people? It looks like we're quiet in the room. So let's, we'll then go to people who are on the call. And just to keep it in order, I might ask you to raise your hand so that we can take people one at a time. Okay, Robert Livingston, I can see your hand up there, Robert. And you'll have to unmute yourself. Thanks.
Yep, done. G'day, Mac. I was about 2 years. I was about 2 years behind you in the army, and I spent some. Well, I was based in Saigon, but I had the privilege of moving around a bit. I know what a B-52 arc light bombing is like from the ground, not from the air. I was in a building a long way away from the whole building, lifted into the air. Years of shit and dust fell out of the ceiling, all down on top of us.
Yeah.
And about, I suppose, about 18 months behind you, I was in Phan Rang. In Saigon, we were rocketed pretty much every night. but I was being given a guided tour around Phan Rang when I first arrived there by Caribou, and within about half the way around, we were in a ditch being rocketed by Charlie, who was just outside the fence somewhere or other. So, and that's when the HH-43s went up and started looking for where they were. The ones that really stuck with me, you mentioned the AC-47s. There were AC-119 Gs and Ks based in Phan Rang when I was there, and they would go up at night and they would light everything up with it. Just quite amazing to see the streams of tracer that poured out of those aircraft. As you say, there were clear fire areas, but of course the Buffalo didn't know what a clear fire area was, and nor did a lot of the poor farmers. But you know, that's war.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, it's it was there was so much armour and so much weaponry around. It was unbelievable. But what I didn't mention was the guys that were probably the most accurate were the VNAF A1 drivers. We had a communication problem with those guys. If we just put down smoke, they hit it. No questions asked or anything. And they were unbelievable. The stuff that they put on the ground was so precise it wasn't even funny. Now there's a question here from somebody, Peter.
Peter Hobbins has typed in a question there, so I'll just read it out, Mac, so people can see.
I've got it here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You're obviously vulnerable in the target area where you are often targeted by ground fire, or did that expose the enemy's position? Well, there was an unwritten rule by Charlie, was that he never fired on us because he knew that he was going to get stuff on top of him. But there were a number of occasions where I was just doing VR, and next thing I can hear pop, 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 stuff just going past. But we never flew straight and level. We always flew with a little bit of rudder in. The aircraft trimmed out that way because the nose was pointing off to one side of our flight path. And Charlie was taught to lead straight in front of the aeroplane. So when he fired, hopefully rounds passed by us. But there were a few people that got a few rounds.
Warwick, there was a question from you. Go ahead.
Yes, I know that you guys have on board aircraft controls were ex-fighter squadrons. Which fighters were you on in the RAF when you went there? Were you in Mirages or Sabres or what?
Oh, I'd already done almost 2 years on Sabres, but no, I was flying Mirages at the time. And in fact, I started my Mirage conversion on the 10th of August, 67. So that was about 2 months or so. And then we went into 76 Squadron and then got involved in exercises up in Darwin before Christmas and after Christmas. One thing I hadn't mentioned was that when I came back from Vietnam, I took 2 months leave in January 69, got back to flying with 76 Squadron. And then I did another exercise up at Shoalwater Bay. This time I was flying the Windshield. And so we were operating out of Raspberry Creek and the Glen and places like that, doing close air support as best we could in that situation. But when I got back from there, I was tapped on the shoulder to design and run the first airborne FAC course at the Air Support Unit at Willietown, and that was in May, June, I think it was. So that was quite interesting, because some of the guys that we checked out on that course went to, it was part of full flight. When they had got the wind chills. Some of those guys that we checked out went to Vietnam. Ray Butler was one of them. Gav Toms, and a few of the others didn't make it, unfortunately. But the fascinating thing was that in one day there, I was either flying a Mirage or flying a wind chill. And
That's great.
that certainly tests your mettle.
Reckon.
Okay, any other questions? Put your hand up if you want to ask a question, and we'll go through. I can't see any at the moment, but a question from me, Mac. So was search missions anything that FAC did, or was that run by a completely different group?
Different organisations. Search and rescues were run by the direct air support centres, using assets that were around to be able to do that.
Okay, yeah. I don't see any hands up. There's a few people with their video muted, so if you're putting your hand up, we won't see you. There's a few questions in the room. Go ahead, Darren.
Since I've got the mic. Hi, Mac. Thanks for the nice, it was a great talk. The movie, which a lot of people would know, called Bat 21, was about a forward air controller with a keeping watch over a shot down fighter pilot. Did you ever see that? Would you have any comment on whether that could have ever happened, or?
Oh, the saga of Bat 21 is one of the last search and rescue missions that were done in Vietnam. Darryl, he's a historian with the forward air controllers over in the States. There's a FAC organisation where they run reunions every couple of years. The next one's in October at Colorado Springs. The rescue of Bat 21 was the call sign of the aircraft that was shot down, and it was the guy in the navigator, I think it was, in the back seat that was rescued. The pilot, I think, was lost. But there was a lot of assets used in trying to recover that guy, and they needed to get him out because of his knowledge.
Thank you.
Another question from the room, Dave.
Okay, Mac, David Anderson here. What year did you leave the RAF? And when you did you continue your flying career after the Royal Australian Air Force?
I transferred to the reserve in '98, but I gave up flying from there on, mainly because it was too expensive to maintain a commercial licence with a first-class instrument rating. It was going to cost me at least $2,000 a month to just do a couple of hours of flying and keep current. So I wasn't in a situation where that I could afford that. A lot of people say, why didn't you go commercial flying? Well, I'd had one experience where I had my first engine failure here in Canberra flying a Duchess. It was just after takeoff and I got the airplane back. And as a result of that, I was that and another flight where I aborted because I couldn't get power on one engine. I started to think about the serviceability or the maintenance on these aircraft that we were hiring. So I made the decision in January '98 not to continue flying. but I soldiered on until with the reserve until 11 years ago, 2011. I was forcibly retired from the Air Force, so to speak, at 66. So, yeah. But I did, just going back, at the end of our flying career, or my flying career, when I was in Air Force office, we got a flying card worth about $6,800 a year to maintain currency. And that was really great. That gave me the opportunity when I was with the director of Jindalee project requirements to hire an aeroplane to fly direct to Longreach and to Adelaide without going through the milk runs up the coast. And we saved time and effort by just doing that. I was flying the Duchess, the Navajo, the Chieftain, the Aero Star, and the Baron. I was qualified on all those aircraft up until the time I transferred to the reserve. I was doing a conversion to a Cessna 310, but that ended up in a paddock somewhere, and I never got to fly it again.
Any other questions?
No, but I would say, Mac, I spent 20 years at Bankstown as an air traffic controller, and you made the right decision. It's Bob Livingstone. I saw far too many light aircraft crash due to not only just because they were inexperienced people, but because of maintenance. You did the right thing.
Yeah, well, the thing is that it's even worse now here in Canberra because the Capital Airport Group has really squashed general aviation, and it forced them out, I think through high wrinkles as well. But even when I was flying here, most of the major maintenance was being done off-site out at places like Cootamundra or even Goulburn.
Well, Mac, I think we might wrap it up. Bob Livingston, were you going to ask one more question?
I was just going to say that I left the system just over 20 years ago, and it'd be nearly 30 years since I was involved in GA in any way. And the reason I left and moved across to Sydney Airport as much as anything else was that the GA was dying and it was being throttled as hard as it could go by the government. And if I wanted to continue a career, I had to move on.
Yeah, it wasn't only that, mate. I think it was the high price of fuel and stuff like that that really knocked a lot of people around. I won't go into the regulation side of things.
So we're going to finish up the Zoom meeting.
And of course, Aaron,
to compliment you on your background too. So thanks for spreading the Wirraway goodness. Mac, once again, it's been an honour. It's been a pleasure. I think you've opened our eyes to a part of the Vietnam War that most of us were either unfamiliar with or were just aware of through the movies. And actually hearing it from somebody who experienced it has been a real eye-opener and fascinating for all of us. So once again, thanks to Mac.
Thank you.
And thanks also to Anna for helping to organise this, and Group Captain Fredericks, who's not on our call this evening. But it's been a pleasure, and we're going to close off the Zoom meeting now. Thanks, everyone, and we're going to have some tea.